conference, and I published a volume on wonders and miracles in antiquity, on the epistemic, specifically on the epistemic and aesthetic dimensions of wonder. And I noticed that these Tauma stories, these narrations of narrative wonders, they often include stories of self-moving technological artifacts, or stories of technological animation, as I described, animacy being produced by technological means. So exactly, my interest in wonder is what forced me in a way to investigate and explore further technology, specifically automatic technology, and the last 6 months, pneumatic technology.
Wonderful, thank you, thank you. I know there's some of that, based on the readings at least, that I read in the handout, some of that in this talk, so. All right, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the invitation. I'll just share my screen.
There, I see it coming up.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So Technolarynges in classical antiquity. Title of the title of my talk. Technolarynges, larynx is the throat. So with technolarynges, I'm just referring to cases of artificial throats, let's say. Recent critical theory challenges the distinction between the animate and the inanimate by arguing that matter can be alive. However, animation is often being reduced to a number of discernible signs. The self-propelled motion of an object, for instance, which is seemingly not caused by entities external to the moving object or indirect contact with it, has a strong effect on whether or not it is perceived by observers as animate. The ascription of traits distinctive of biologically animate beings to inanimate objects, such as human-specific skills, anatomical features, emotions, etc., endows them with animacy as well. Voice, moreover, is an element that creates an impression of animacy. Julie Parks has recently explored the technical reproduction of voice by asking what 18th century automata can tell us about the relationship between voice, the human, machines, and fiction. This talk expands that question to the realm of ancient technology, the concept of animation in antiquity, and reproduction of voice, and argues that in order to fully understand the deceptive aims of pneumatic devices and automata, we need to integrate into our discussion the reproduction of voice. First, I will discuss technological reproduction of voice and speech in the text of the Greek engineers, especially in Heroes, pneumatics, Heroes of Alexander. He is a Hellenistic engineer. References to the corporeal constraints of voice and speech reproduction support here, I suggest, the task of technological animation. In the second part of this talk, I will turn to non-technical literature, discussing the manufacture of rational speech, of logos, In these stories, I argue, authors employed technological explanations provided in treatises of pneumatic technology in order to create a believable framework for a story of reproduced logos. The modern invention of automated voice dates back to the 18th century. In its second half, Wolfgang von Kebelen manufactured a synthetic speech device which produced not only speech sounds, but also whole words and short sentences. The machine, described in his book Mechanismus der menschlichen Sprache, nebst Beschreibung einer sprechenden Maschine, did not imitate a human body form, as you can see in the slide. But it consisted of various devices that resembled human organs, such as a hand-operated bellows. You can see the bellows on the slide. And these hand-operated bellows represented the lungs. It also included a reed for a glottis, a funnel for a mouth, and a set of tubes for nose and nostrils. The bellows forced air through a wine chest. You can see the wine chest in the slide. Through this wine chest, the bellows forced air into the reed, and the reed was vibrating, and in this way the reed was able to produce, through vibration, was producing sounds. Moreover, the user of this machine, by manipulating with their hands the mouth, as you can see in the slide, by manipulating the mouth of the machine, and this mouth, as you can see, is attached to the reed, and of course to other various tubes, was able to produce also different vowels and consonants. So the user was able to recreate syllables. Now, unlike 18th century machines for the production of synthetic voice, the Technolarynges, the technical throats that produce voice and speech, described by Greek engineers, do not aim at reproducing language, logos. Similar to their early modern successors, however, they look to replicating voice or speech while imitating, of course, up to a certain degree, the function of organs such as the larynx, the windpipe, mouth, and the process of respiration. In the place, for instance, of the windpipe, of the trachea, which inflates with air, as we will see, there are tubes which distribute the air in the hollow parts of a vessel. Now, ancient authors held different organs as responsible for voice and speech. What is important to note before we proceed with these organs and their technical reproduction is that some ancient authors seem to differentiate between voice, which is called phone, and speech, which is called dialectos, and is the articulation of the voice by the use of tongue. Speech, according to ancient texts, is something that all living beings which possess a tongue, as I said, can practice. Birds, for instance, use their tongues as a means of communication with other birds. This is what we learn from Aristotle in his treatise Parts of Animals. But humans, again, as we learn from Aristotle, are in general especially good at producing speech because they have a fitting tongue. Along with the tongue and lips, the palate and teeth are also considered tools of speech. On the other hand, the trachea, the larynx, and the pharynx produce not only speech, but also voice, only phone. Now, respiration is associated with voice and speech production as well, but only after the 4th century BC. in a treatise of the Hippocratic corpus entitled The Fleshes, on the Fleshes, breath in this treatise is associated with the production of voice, but it's not related to the lungs. Aristotle, in his work on respiration, discusses how the lungs serve as an instrument of breathing. He explicitly discussed this connection. Plato in his Timaeus implies this connection as well, but Aristotle is the first who explicitly describes the connection between lungs, breathing, respiration, and the production of voice. He argues, Aristotle, that the structure of lungs and their pneumatic action closely resemble that of forge bellows. And he directly associates, as I said, the lungs and breathing with voice production. In his text on the soul, the text that you have on your handout, and here as well in this slide, he tells us that voice, phone, is distinguished from noise, general noise, which he describes by using the term sophos. These two are distinguished in that voice, phone, is produced by living creatures which have lungs, pneumon, and windpipes, arteria. Later in the text, this is the next passage in the middle in the slide. He refers specifically to the fact that voice is produced when something strikes something else in a certain medium, which in our case, this medium is the air. On the Soul 420b in this passage, he adds that voice is the fingerprint of the soul, and that inhaled air is guided by the psyche, by the soul, and fantasia. Well, fantasia is a difficult term to translate, but let's translate by using the phrase mental image. So the soul, the voice is the fingerprint of the soul, and the inhaled air is guided by both psyche, the soul, and fantasia, by mental images. Therefore, he argues, not all sounds produced by living creatures with soul using their lung and throat can be considered voice. Rather, voice, phone, is a meaningful sound, and not just every sound associated with inhaled air, such as a cough. A cough is not a phone, is not a voice, according to Aristotle. On the other hand, instrument, as Aristotle claims, this at the beginning of the passage that you have in your handout. So instruments, he claims, such as a flute and a lyre, and other inanimate objects, might seem to reproduce voice, but this perception comes about only by analogy, kath homoioteta, to the voice of living beings. These instruments do not have a larynx or lungs, hence they do not produce voice, but merely a psophos, a noise, or an echos, a sound. So it is not their biological-like features that support instruments' allegedly animacy, but as we learn from other treatises on music, such as the harmonics, the material requirements of sound production are the crucial factor here. Some of those materials, such as gold or stone, used for the construction of sound, are described as weak voice, and dull sounding is chnophonos and duseches, due to their compactness or thickness. And other materials, such as bronze, are melodious and vocal. They are oiphonos and lalos, since the empty space within their structure or their density allows sound and voice to get through. Hence, materials and moreover their properties play an essential role in how the musicians use them to craft a voice. Different types of materials produce different voices. Emphasis on materials and their oral properties suggests also that the musician, rather than imposing a voice upon matter, is extracting the voice inherent in the matter, in the material. Now, unlike the authors of harmonics, engineers, Hellenistic engineers such as Hero do not pay attention to the properties of the materials used for the construction of mechanical music instruments or of vessels emitting voice. But both Hero and Philo of Byzantium emphasize the materiality of air and its oitonia, its flexibility, as opposed to atonia and the atona, non-elastic materials such as ivory, for instance, as well as the way they also emphasize the way in which air's elastic behavior serves as a requirement for animation and reproduction of voice. They do emphasize on this specific material because air is related to two essential parameters of pneumatic technologies. First, as I suggested above, air is associated with pneuma, with breathe, and with the process of respirations, hence with animacy and life itself. Hero in his pneumatics often uses the term anapnoe, respiration, to describe the motion of air produced by an airtight vessel function as a bellows, as well as various other physiology terms related to breathing and voice production. Words like stoma, mouth, diaphragm, halos, lips, glottis, trachelos, throat, and odus, tooth, are frequently used by Hero in his pneumatics to describe various devices and the hidden sources of pneumatic animation. The information Hero provides about the internal structure of his pneumatic devices intends to create a greater impression of animacy upon the observer, watching a bird moving and singing, a snake whistling, or an animal crying. To put it differently, motion and speech and voice are just the visible proofs that the pneumatic device is alive already inside. Just to give one example, at Hero's Pneumatics, in the first paragraph, passage 15, you have this in your handout, and here again with a very nice translation, but very useful translation of Woodcroft, and the very helpful drawing. Hero in this passage, he describes how the voice phone of a blackbird, which is called melanchoryphos, or a whistling syrigmos, are being produced. So in this passage, he describes how the voice, both the phone and the syrigmos, the whistling of this of a blackbird, are being produced. Water, he says, is poured through a funnel, a honne, as you can see on the slide, which is placed on the top of an airtight pedestal, and which has a long tube, which is called in the text kaulos. That almost, as you can see, this kaulos, this tube, reaches the bottom of the pedestal. Now, close to the funnel, again on the top of the pedestal, there's a small pipe, which is called syringion, and is indicated through the letters G and H. As you can see, this is the small pipe, whose mouth, stomion, is curved. This is the L. Well, L is actually the vessel, but it's the tube which is close to the L, which is called stomion in the text. So you have a small pipe, the syringion, which is whose mouth, the stomion, is curved and dips into water, which is placed in a small vessel next to it. If water is poured in the funnel, in the first funnel, the EF funnel, The air being driven out passes through the pipe and a sound is being produced. If the mouth of the pipe dips into water, a bubbling sound and anakachlazon echoes, and the voice of a blackbird is being reproduced according to the text. Now, it is interesting that the term used for the opening of the pipe, stomion, mouth, as well as the term for a pipe, syrinx, which is often employed in medical treatises to indicate pores or bronchial passages of the lungs. Here you have the bronchial passages, and in the middle you have the trachea. And these bronchial passages, as I said, they are called syringes. And this is a term that Hero uses as well in order to describe this small pipe through which air is being passes air and ends in the water and reproduce and the whole procedure they reproduce sound. So these two terms, the fact that he uses the term stomio, mouth, and the syrinx, support the lifelike appearance of the construction, and of course the reproduction of sound. Here, of course, does not go so far as Kebelen and other early modern engineers in demonstrating how the material and technological world could substitute for human organs, but he does improve the realism of the voice of the singing birds by using anatomical terminology. This should have a great effect on readers and observers' conceptual beliefs of animacy. Now, the importance of air in treatises of pneumatic technology is secondly furthermore, it's associated with the way the engineering plan achieves a manipulation of air and manages to produce a vacuum by artificial means. Mechanical reproductions of voice depend on the motion of matter by means of the void and pressure. Hero, in the introduction of his pneumatics, tells us that there cannot be in nature a masked, empty place. Remember of the horror vacuum. A vacuum can be produced, he says, however, through the application of a certain force through which the particles of air are being divided. More precisely, this happens, Hero argues, through processes such as compression and rarefaction. At the beginning, you have an example of compression. What do we mean with compression? In the middle of this spiral construction, you have the process of rarefaction, compression and rarefaction. The former, the compression, increase an item's density, while the latter reduce it. These processes are supported by extra forces, such as incoming water, devices like siphons, weights, or heat. Compression and rarefaction are further related to the elasticity and tension capacities of air or pneuma. Hero, again in the introduction to his pneumatics, describes pneuma as air in motion and argues that air is an elastic substance capable of compression and of restoration to its former condition on the withdrawal of the pressure. This is what we see happening in the case of artificial lungs or airtight vessels that work like a bellows, which as it expands, it sucks in air, and as it compresses, the air is pushed back out. The following example shows exactly how air and void are being manipulated by the engineering plan to produce voice. In the second book, passage 32 that you have in your handout, Hero describes a shrine over which a blackbird is made to sing and revolve by worshippers who turn a wheel, which is in turn helps to move to other vessels and lift up, helps to move to other wheels and lift up and down a conical vessel, as you can see in the drawing, which is indicated through the letters O, N. So these two wheels, they lift up and down this conical vessel, which is called pnikois in the text, which is placed again in a vessel of water, and this vessel is indicated through the letters R and V. When the wheel is let go, the conical vessel descends into the water, it expulses the air and produces a sound, which is being produced through the tube syrinx again, which is indicated by described by the letters XO, as you can see in the drawing. This is the small tube through which the sound of the blackbird is being produced. Now, in a later passage, in passage 35 of the second book, you don't have this passage in your handout. The sound of a blackbird is produced once the sound of a tuning pipe produced by hot air reaches the water contained within a construction which looks like a sparrow. So he says, you have this device, he says in paragraph 35, reproduce the sound of a blackbird by using hot air and so on. And instead of having, however, the device, instead of representing a blackbird, it represents a sparrow, he says. Now, this case describes in the best way how engineers take advantage of voice as animacy cue in order to show how pneumatic technology works. What needs to be explained here is how the bird's voice is being reproduced in a mechanical way, not whether the voice perfectly imitates a certain bird species. Sparrow or blackbird does not play much role. I mean, here he's just interested in explaining how this machine reproduces voice, phone. The bird species does not play at all any role. What pneumatic treatises do is to give actually the opportunity to the audience to look inside the device and understand how motion, voice, and speech are being produced. What seems to be of great importance here then is not only whether a sound can be identified as an element referring to living entities, but whether its perception can be carefully controlled by its mechanical source. Now, while voice and speech, the dialectos, as we have seen, can be replicated both through technological devices and instruments, the imitation of rational speech, the imitation of logos, is considered in Antiquity to be an impossible task. It is often described as an aporia, indicating a dead end in manufacturing process. Now, rational speech, logos, differs from voice, phone, and speech, dialectos, in that it is established by convention among human beings. This is what we learn again from Aristotle. Hence, distinct from the reproduction of voice and speech, replication of rational logos by means of technology exhibits specifically anthropomimetic animacy cues that compel their perceiver to interpret them as coming exactly from a human or divine source. Indeed, rational speech, logos, apart from being recorded and reproduced in writing, cannot reside beyond strict human corporeal bounds or divine embodiments. We will need to wait until the 18th century and Christian Gottlieb Kratzenstein's vowel tubes and Keberlen's speaking machines in order to see speaking human-like automata. And this is because in Antiquity, while voice and speech in general stand for liveness and characterize various species of animals as well as humans, Rational speech, logos, represents particularly human intelligence and subjectivity. That is, it expresses through it expresses thought or gnome, political and moral values. To put it differently, while theoretically technology was available in antiquity, moral values were difficult to reproduce mechanically. What comes close, I believe, to a technical reproduction of rational speech, apart from writing, are fictional cases of ventriloquism, talking statues and heads, and the inspired speech of Pythia. But these cases do not reflect specific technological intentions and design, and they are often placed between folklore and scientific fraud. Animated logos stays in the realm of fiction, but it draws on the very real discourse of applying animation by the technological recreation of voice and speech. Cases of reproduction of rational speech in non-technical literature exemplify the human desire for speaking machines. Some authors, ancient authors, employ several tools required for technical production of voice and speech, such as bellows, speaking tubes attached to inanimate bodies and entities, and the concepts of pneuma and void to support exactly the idea of technical reproduction of rational speech. Such a story is described in a very beautiful way by Lucian in his Alexander the False Prophet. Alexander, as the text tells us, this prophet, possessed a linen, human-like puppet serpent called Glycon, which can open and close its mouth and move its tongue by means of horsehairs, and can also deliver prophecy. Now, Alexander the prophet, was actually the inventor, at least according to Lucian, of this cult, this Glycon cult, the cult of the serpent. And he continues in the text, Lucian, and he describes the process of the manufacture of this talking serpent in a quite distinctive way. In paragraph 26, he says that Alexander fastened cranes windpipes together and passed them through the head of the serpent, the athes kephales. A person spoke into the tubes from the outside, answering the questions of the people asking for oracles. As Karen Libali notes, these techno-prophecies, or the autophonoi devices, as the text calls them, the automatic devices, autophonoi devices, are reminiscent of the automatic technology described by Hero of Alexandria. The technical explanation of these techno-prophecies resonates with the reader as being plausible. Believability is essential to the audience involvement in the story. Without it, the audience will be jerked back into reality and recognize the fact that they are just listening to yet another story. Pneumatic elements are, for similar reasons, incorporated into a story told by the Christian apologist Hippolytus in the 2nd century AD. In his work, A Refutation of All Heresies, we find references to hidden pipes made of necks of animals and metal attached by pagan necromancers to a skull, which gives voice to prophecies. As when Plutarch responds to those trying to belittle Pythian oracles by saying that they are the product of a mere ventriloquist techniques, he has available to him a full range of examples of pneumatic technologies to support Delphic inspiration. Plutarch argues in the text, The Obsolescence of Oracles, that the Karen and Bri, the Mantikon, Roima, and Numa of the Delphic prophetess, which is perceived as a vessel that channels Apollo, is issued by itself through air or running waters. This creates, he says, an unfamiliar aethes, an unusual atopos temperament, which is described with the term crasis, and opens up certain passages, poroi, through which impressions of the future are transmitted. At paragraph 433a, you don't have this, I believe, in your handout. He explained further that the prophetic vapor inhaled by the prophetess fills up the vacant spaces and cements all together by fitting itself in. In a previous passage in the same treatise, he makes an interesting differentiation between diviners and ventriloquists. He says that, for it is silly, he says, and completely childish to imagine that the god himself, like the ventriloquists who were called Eurycleus in the past and now they are called Pythones, enters into the bodies of his diviners and speaks using their mouth and voice as instruments. Moreover, Plutarch's conception of a rational foundation for divination, which is conceived as simultaneously scientific and religious, does not go so far as to accept the possibility that a statue can produce rational speech. He admits that statues could appear to sweat, shed tears, and exude something like drops of blood, but only because the materials of their construction are being transformed under different atmospheric conditions. And this is what you see in the first picture of the slide. And then the tears that we see coming out of the statue's eyes are actually the result of atmospheric changes. He also adds that it is even possible, he says, for a statue to produce a noise like a moan or a groan through fracture of its parts or a rupture. This has nothing to do, he says, with the divine. Lucian, in his Gallus, paragraph 24, implies something similar. The interior of statues, he says, hides bars and struts and nails and beams and wedges and pitch and clay and mice and rats, but none of these elements can make a statue talk. Plutarch's scientific explanation of the prophetic talk of a vessel like Pythia, as well as Lucian's mechanical understanding of the prophetic speech of the snake, partly correspond to a number of sources presenting the phenomenon of talking or weeping statues. The list is long, from Pindar's Chrysae Caledones, the golden female statues of women who sing, to Daedalus speaking statues and the cow of Myron in Greek anthology, to one of the most famous speaking statues in antiquity, the statue of Memnon. Speaking statues in antiquity undoubtedly have a significant role in the Greek and Roman imagination. Some of them owe their voice and animative features to their relationship with the viewer or visitor. That is, they become alive through the viewer's gaze and fantasia. Others are animated and presented in a vivid way through an awe-inspiring medium such as pneumatic and automatic technology, like we saw happening in the animation stories told among others by Lucian and Plutarch. It is within this framework of sculptural animation by means of technology that Callistratus, an orator of the 4th or 5th century AD, states that the Ethiopians, when constructing the statue of Memnon, have found a way to make it talk. According to Callistratus, this is the only work of art of which we know that has implanted in the stone perceptions and a voice. Noemata kai phonen, perceptions and voice. Even though Daedalus is capable of creating lifelike statues, he still, says Callistratus, in contrast to the Ethiopians, unable to give to marble statues one of the most important characteristics of liveness, that is, voice. By contrast, Memnon statues even capable of changing sounds according to light and brightness. When sunbeams move across the surface of the statue, this becomes filled with voice. Responsible for this phenomenon, as Callistratus underlines, is the techne and heires, the art and hands of the Ethiopians. Similar technique is described by Hero in his Pneumatics, book 2, paragraph 13. Here, Hero describes by means of sun and heated air, a fountain, probably designed to be placed in the outdoor area of a sanctuary, trickles, produces sounds. By adopting a technological explanation to the spectacle of the voice of Memnon, Callistratus implicitly rejects the assumption that Memnon makes a sound as the result of a natural sonic phenomenon as depicted by among others, Pausanias. He also, Callistratus, does not appear to give any credit to the stories presenting the Memnon's voice as the result of an epiphanic phenomenon, as explained by Philostratus in the life of Apollonius of Tyana, where the statue rises up and makes obeisance to the sun. With his first description, moreover, where Callistratus presents the statue of a satyr, he observes how the artist, in this first description of the collection, there he observes, as I said, how the artist has made the stone of the statue able to convey the feeling of the depicted flute player by transforming the air in the satyr's lung into pneuma, which is vital for the production of music. He then, in the same description number 1, acknowledged the fact that the talking statue of Memnon manufactured by the Ethiopians can have a voice indeed. So he compares and he says, if the artist of this first of this satyr statue has managed to transform the air which is placed in the lungs of the satyr into music and sound, so yes, absolutely, I'm convinced that Memnon did produce a voice. The voice of Memnon is manipulated by ancient authors who use it to support both animate and inanimate conceptualizations. For instance, Strabo believes that the sound, psophos, he uses the term psophos, coming from Memnon's statue, might be due to a trick, he says, Strabo. And Pliny notes that the statue is worth mentioning only by reason of his material, not his speaking abilities. Among the sources on Memnon's talking statue that Patricia Rosenmeyer presents in her book on Memnon, some specifically refer to the voice of the statue. Patricia Rosenmeyer argues that stegma, phone, boe, and aode, all these terms are used at various points by different authors, but almost all the visitors who left inscriptions agreed that what they left inscriptions in the form of graffitis on the statue of Memnon. They agreed, all these inscriptions agreed that what they were hearing was best described as a voice, inarticulate perhaps, but still clearly meaningful, and a sign of favor from Memnon himself. Since Memnon's voice is not particularly animate or inanimate, the perceptual animacy of the statue remains ambiguous. Callistratus' interpretation of Memnon's voice and the time of its performance is, by contrast, technologically determined. That is to say, the orator, Callistratus, infers from the finished product the technical steps that could lead to real pneumatic effects in order to vividly render the visual object into word. So similar to the engineer, the orator here presents technological animacy suggested through the presence of voice, both as an event mediated by cognition and perceptual phenomenon. So apart from drawing attention to artificial voice as an indicator of animacy, this talk suggests that the technological reproduction of voice and speech seems to take into consideration several challenges that are associated with natural voice and speech in antiquity. Since these are only produced, voice and speech are only produced by humans and animals with lungs and larynx and several other organs, voice and speech reproduction requires the simulation of a specific body environment. But technology recreates simply a voice and speech, not rational logos. The latter's value cannot be reduced to a number of physical characteristics that can be modeled and replicated. Rational speech refers to humans or gods, to their signification and subjectivity. Non-technical sources, on the other hand, do not hesitate to describe talking machines and their logos, which they explain and present as believable through the employment of pneumatic principles and tools. Thank you very much.
Oh, is this the statue of Memnon?
This is the statue of Memnon. Sorry, yeah, I forgot to, yes, to change the slide. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to change to gallery view so we can have a more conversational setting here. All right, let's have some questions. I know I have some, but I'd like to give precedence here to our members. Just raise your hand, your real hand or your Zoom hand, and I'll do some moderating. All right, well, no one's jumping up. So my first question, it might be an obvious one, Maria. Oh, Virgo, I see your hand now. But I'll continue on my path here. Has anyone tried to make these devices described by Hero that you showed to us?
Yes, there were some. Yes, there are some by modern Greeks as well, and early modern reproductions. But the difficult thing, I mean, we also have the Glasgow project on Heroes and automatic and pneumatic devices, where they've tried at least to reconstruct Heroes devices. The problem with these reproductions is that the materials, I mean, it's not the materials described by Hero. It's not, we don't have the same materials. And this makes it difficult. And in addition to that, Heroes and Philon's descriptions of these devices, it's not very accurate. It's not very, sometimes modern scholars describe Hero's explanation of these phenomena as nonsense, and as they say that Hero doesn't understand how engineering works, how the pneumatic principles work, and that at the beginning, where he explains the theory of vacuum, that he just took the whole passage from Straton, and he doesn't actually understand what he's writing. So sometimes, yeah, it's very difficult to reconstruct these devices. Although some people, as I said, yes, modern Greeks as well. There is a wonderful small a museum in Athens, placed in Plaka, where the visitors can see replicas of these devices.
And do they make sounds? Do they make the sounds of the bird, or?
I think they do. I think they do. I've
Okay.
never visited. I've never visited a museum. I wanted to, but because of the COVID, it was impossible. But I think they do some of them. Yes, they do.
Yeah. Okay. Gorgo, go ahead. Oh, you're muted still.
I wanted to just mention that as you were speaking, I couldn't help but be struck by the reaction of a viewer of all of these devices. And it seems to me that there's three factors involved here. One is imagination, the viewer imagining that this could be real. The second is admiration for the technical skill of the engineer or the artisan that creates it. And then the third is the element of deception, trying to convince the viewer that there is some supernatural or extra natural phenomenon at play. And I just wondered if you had thought about any of this at all, and if you might comment on it.
Absolutely, yes. That's why when I referred to a passage, unfortunately, I haven't included that in the initial handout. In a passage, Hero describes again in a very similar way how the production of blackbird, the sound of a blackbird is being reproduced. But in this, that's why I refer to that in this today. In this passage, he says, well, he talks about this blackbird, which is the term in Greek is kosifos, and then he says immediately, well, this the voice, the sound actually comes from a sparrow, because for him it actually doesn't play any role if it's a sparrow or a blackbird. What he wants to do there is just explain how the production of voice is being done. I mean, how engineers manage to reproduce voice. So imagination, of course, is part of it, because Hero and engineers, they need the visitors in order to, let's say, fulfill or complement or supplement the visitor's imagination, supplements the technological plan and the intentions of the engineers, because the engineers, they are just to reproduce in a very simple way the sound. But the visitor should be the one who recreates the whole scene. The animation, it's a process which has two parts. The one part is the technological part, the engineer. The other part is the visitor, the audience, which supplements through the fantasia, the engineering plan and the animation plan. So about admiration of technical skills and deception, of course, yes, it's there. Tauma is everywhere. The term tauma, wonder is everywhere. Let's create technological wonders. This is the spirit. The difference between the technological wonder and the wonder as we find it, let's say, in Homer, the taumaidetai, is that the technological wonder is it's a wonder. It's close enough to the Aristotelian conception of wonder. They say the tamaze, as Aristotle said, it's the bikini. I mean, the tamaze creates the aporia, and then the philosopher would guide the person who admires, guides through a process that leads to knowledge. The engineers do the same thing. It is a wonder, they say, you are allowed to admire this technologically complicated artifact that pretends to be alive, but be aware, you should now hear what I'm presenting to you. It's also the explanation. So it's not about dollars, it's not about deception. It's not a theater. It's not a theater, it has nothing to do with dollars. I'm explaining to you everything. It's philosophy. It's science.
If I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on the subject of imagination in the anima, you know, that's the translation of fantasia, but as Christopher Shields in his Oxford commentary notes, you know, it's not imagination in the sense of creative imagination. It's imagination as like the closest word we can think of as the process of manipulating images in the mind and um, you know, working with impressions of that appear to us. Real imagination, it seems to me, is probably in Aristotle's terminology, nous poetikos. What do you think?
I mean, imagination, of course, I don't mean with imagination, let's say mental image. That's why I said it's a very difficult term to translate. Well, imagination, of course, it's not, has nothing to do with the modern term imagination, but still, and the way, let's say, you have an observer, someone coming to the temple and sees this and sees these technical constructions, and as I said, his fantasia supplements what he can actually not see because it's behind, it's inside the machine. Well, fantasia is also connected with memory. The memory in his text on Memoria and on reminiscence, Aristotle explicitly talks about the connection of memory with fantasia. So even if it's not imagination, I'm sure the audience, the visitors who enter a temple, they have seen a sparrow singing sometime in their life, so they remember. The mental image is there in their head, and the singing of the bird reminds them of this of this evidence. So the whole the mental image that they already have there in their head and they are recalled through the process of memory supplements the technological wonder.
Yeah, in some contexts, imagination is really a very good translation of fantasia. Thank you. You know, I love the whole presentation that you gave today, and the focus that you gave to book 2 of De Anima. You know, resonates with me especially.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our guests? I was thinking of the distinction that you observed, Maria, between voice and rational speech, and somehow also was thinking of modern vocal performance, such as a cappella singing, where there's often an attempt to imitate instrumental sounds. Mm-hmm. Or in hip hop beatboxing, the attempt to imitate like a synthesized specific, electronic sound or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think: how are other human voices described sometimes? Like the voices of foreigners, are they, yes, a lacking of rationality or something like this? I'm trying to form a question here.
Yes, well, this is very interesting how Thucydides, for instance, tries to imitate in writing a tab, of course. I mean, how the barbaroid might sound, or we have also this process of onomatopoeia. Well, like, again, you have this. It's a reproduction of human speech through words. However, I mean, they don't try. It's only in text. I mean, in words. They never try to actually replicate the human logos. And then and there with the barbaroi, with the speech of the barbaroi, it's again They do reproduce it in words, but again, something they don't understand. So is it logos for them at least?
Right. Well, thank you very much. This was
No, thank
fascinating. And thank you all for joining us, and all of you out there watching. Thank you, and we'll see